Sometimes known as ratmen, these sly and evil creatures inhabit subterranean tunnel complexes beneath cities. Always smelling of putrid sewage, Wererats sneak around towns and cities in order to find things to steal, people to ransom, and fresh meat to consume. Before we go in though, this video is brought to you once again by Grim Hollow, the Player's Guide. Look guys, the Grim Hollow Player's Guide is a book chock full of things that you desperately need for your campaign. From new schools of magic like Sangromancy, blood magic, to new subclasses for all of your favorite characters. See, their previous Kickstarter was a great success, a book that changed many of the ways that I run my games, with the addition of bleeding as a condition to transformations like how to turn your character into a lich, a vampire, a werewolf, and much more. Now they have a new Kickstarter, and in it you will get a way to turn your characters into elementals and fae, with full descriptors as to how that transformation will take place, how your characters will slowly level into those new forms, how they will develop new feats and new flaws, and different stages of transformation. Look, being real, this guy's made an awesome and successful Kickstarter before, and now they're bound to make another great one. Thanks to the great support of the community, we already have unlocked tons of new subclasses as stretch goals, like the Parasite Warlock Patron or the Circle of Blood Druid. There's the College of Adventurers Bard and the Bulwark Warrior Fighter archetype. There's literally tons more that have been unlocked. Please go over and check the link in the description and in the comment section and support this great Kickstarter. Their last book was incredible, and this one is bound to be as well. But now, with that said, let's continue with the video. As always, let's first go over the 5th edition monster manual and see what they tell us about these creatures. Now, we'll have a video in the near future about lycanthropy in general, so we will cover all of this portion here on that one. That video will probably be another 30 to 40 minute video, so already not looking forward to editing it. But for this one, we will simply focus on Wererats, one of the many types of werebeasts that exist in Dungeons & Dragons. For that particular race of creatures, we really only have this here, which is sad, a tiny portion of a page. The reason it is sad is because Wererats are a full race of creatures with culture, mannerisms, ecology. People forget that two werebeasts can procreate with each other to form more of the same type of werebeast. So colonies of these type of creatures spawn in the world all the time, and they all have interesting societies. They are not just a thing that you can get turned into if you get bitten by one. They're not just a curse. But anyways, it says here that Wererats are cunning lycanthropes with sly, avaricious personalities. They are wiry and twitchy in humanoid form with thin hair and darting eyes. In their humanoid and hybrid forms, Wererats prefer light weapons and use ambush tactics rather than fighting as a pack. Although a Wererat can deliver a nasty bite in its rat form, it favors that form for stealthy infiltration and escape rather than combat. A Wererat clan operates more like a thieves guild, with Wererats transmitting their curse only to creatures that they want to induct into the clan. Wererats that are accidentally cursed or break loose from the clan's control are quickly hunted down and killed. Then lastly, it says that Wererat clans are found throughout urban civilization, often dwelling in cellars and catacombs. These creatures are common in the sewers beneath major cities, viewing those subterranean areas as their hunting grounds. Rats and giant rats are commonly found living among Wererats. Now, all the way over here in the corner, we're told that if a human is turned into a Wererat, they gain a dexterity of 15 if they had less than that, so they basically become way more nimble than the average person. And then over here, 2 pages later, we get the actual stat sheet for the average Wererat. They are good at perception, though I should point out that there should be a big asterisk on that. Wererats actually have terrible eyesight. The reason they would have proficiency in perception would be because of their hearing and smelling, which is actually really good. Anyways, lycanthropes in general, of course, are only weak to magic or silvered weapons, and so Wererats in this stat sheet here share the same power, though I also need to point out that there should be another big asterisk in here. Wererat vulnerabilities and invulnerabilities are extremely hard to predict because they tend to always be different. All werewolves, for example, are weak to silver. Everyone knows that, but not all Wererats are. There are Wererat colonies that are actually immune to silver, but maybe weak to cold iron. Some that could be immune to cold iron, but then vulnerable to fire. Wererats are described as being the weakest of all of the lycanthropes in terms of raw power, but they are also described as being the hardest to kill because finding their vulnerabilities is a task in and of itself. Typically, if you find the vulnerability of a single Wererat, you will find that the warren that Wererat comes from will all share that same vulnerability. It's basically all based on the strain of the virus that created them. Anyways, dark vision of 60 feet, though this only applies in their rat form. This is very important. If you were transformed into a wererat and you already had dark vision because maybe you were an elf, then you get to keep that dark vision, and that's important to know too. Generally speaking, you do tend to keep some of your racial benefits when you transform into a lycanthrope, though some exceptions of course apply. This here is meant to be used for a true lycanthrope, that being a wererat that was born a wererat because it had two wererat parents. Now I should also point out, because the monster manual didn't put in there, but generally speaking, the hybrid version of a wererat that is naturally born would also have dark vision. However, that dark vision is only 30 feet, and then in the sun, a wererat can only see up to 15 feet. Wererats are supposed to be myopic and basically almost blind, especially when out into the sun. Now, as far as abilities go, a wererat can basically polymorph into many different forms. One is the normal human form, then a hybrid rat-human form, which is the one you see here in the picture, and then to a full-blown giant rat. Its attacks are mostly based on the weapons it has in hand, with an interesting exception of its bite, which can transmit lycanthropy. But that's it. Now let's continue on and talk about what the 5th edition monster manual did not tell you about wererats. I think the first thing that we need to talk about, which I believe is by far the most interesting part about the ratmen, are why we don't see more of them. And this is the recurring question that I get a lot. If lycanthropes can reproduce with each other and they can infect others with their bites and claws, and they are so resistant to damage, why are they so rare? Well, we're not going to speak about other lycanthropes, but wererats are very peculiar in this particular regard. You have to wonder, why don't we see a situation like in Warhammer, where you can find a whole civilization of ratmen? I mean, why don't wererats reproduce like rats? Can normal rats even carry the lycanthropic disease? So basically there's two reasons why they are so rare. For one, wererats have an aversion to reproduction, which you probably didn't see coming, and it is very ironic considering what they are. See, wererats are psychologically driven to avoid reproduction because wererats are parasites. A wererat colony cannot function on their own. They cannot farm resources, they cannot craft tools, and they cannot herd animals. Wererats take from people who do those things. They find a group of people who produces, and then they take those things from those people. If wererats didn't have a society to steal from, they would fall down and crumble. This is also compounded by the fact that wererats have an extreme taste for humanoid flesh. So when you combine those two factors, you get a society that needs to have humanoids close by, a city of humanoids that they can feed off of. If the colony of wererats living in the sewers suddenly had an explosion of growth, they would be found and then eliminated, or worse yet, they might take over the city with those new numbers and deplete its resources, and then basically crumble and die. Once again, wererats are parasites, and a parasite that kills its host will die. The other reason why wererats are so rare is actually based off of his ability to infect others. See, and you definitely would have not seen this one coming, but wererats actually do not infect people with bites, which probably goes against everyone's understanding of all lycanthropes. But see, wererats are fairly unique in this. The problem that wererats have in this regard is the way the virus is transmitted and the way their mouth is shaped. The lycanthrope disease is carried through parasites in the body of a wererat. These parasites can be found in many of the ways that you would expect, including the saliva. The problem lies in that the teeth of a wererat are actually outside of the mouth, and most times that means that those teeth do not carry saliva in them. When a wererat bites you, they do what we call a dry bite. No fluids are actually being transmitted to the one getting bit, and hence, no parasites are being transmitted. Now, of course, there's still obviously a chance that you might get some saliva in there, but generally speaking, this is a 1 in 100 chance of you getting the parasite through a bite. Now, hilariously, most times the parasite ends up being transmitted by a wererat. It actually tends to be through normal weapon attacks, which again, I bet you didn't see coming. You actually have a way better chance of getting lycanthropy from a wererat by getting hit by its sword than by getting bit by the creature. See, wererats live in complete and utter filth. I mean, their home is literally in the sewers. They are always in constant contact with feces and vomit and corpses. Many times, it is their own vomit and their own feces that they are in constant contact with. They don't care about cleaning their weapons or gear, so it is likely that their weapons have been in contact with their own feces, which of course would carry the parasite. I mean, there are a billion scenarios in which the parasite could have ended up in their weapons, and it does all the time. So whenever you get struck by their dirty, soiled rotten sword, your chances of contracting the disease goes up and up. You should also know that the parasite is what we call species specific, which means that it only affects humanoids. The disease does not affect normal rodents, and normal rodents cannot carry it either, so there are no chances of a wild rat-created wild epidemic. Now, further speaking about creation of wererats, a wererat can produce a child with a non-wererat humanoid. A wererat male and a normal female will produce a normal humanoid child, albeit the child will be shorter in height than it otherwise would have been. But then a normal male and a wererat female, on the other hand, will produce a special wererat child. We call these ratlings. Basically, the baby will look like a normal giant rat, except that it will have opposable thumbs and will have humanoid-like mannerisms, like for example, the giant rat will enjoy standing and walking in 2 feet. At the age of 2, this ratling will develop its first transformation into a humanoid, a form that will share the age of the rat, but 3 times older. So by the first time the rat can transform into a humanoid, being 2 years old, the humanoid form will look like a 6-year-old child. This doesn't change later in the years, so if a 10-year-old natural wererat transforms into a man, the man will look like a 30-year-old man. Now, you have to remember, you cannot cure a naturally born wererat from lycanthropy. You cannot cure a person from something that they have always been, in the same way as you cannot cure a human from being a human. You can only cure a person from lycanthropy if they were infected and then turned. Those differences are crucial, not just because it matters in terms of curing, but because the disease works differently for both kinds as well. A wererat that was born a wererat can actually keep its intelligence through transformations, so it can make smart decisions and think even while it is a rodent, whereas someone that was turned into a wererat will have difficulty even remembering most of their transformations. Quote, "An infected lycanthrope will change involuntarily. The full moon can trigger the transformation, but so can very strong emotions or pain. An infected wererat is not in control of its hunger for humanoid flesh. It attacks friend and foe alike, preferring victims that are known personally by the infected wererat." End quote. A person that is infected by this disease will personally seek people it knows from its personal life and try and eat them, getting a bizarre form of satisfaction from hunting those it knows. The person will most likely not remember its night as a monster at all, most times only having dreamlike memories of its depredations. But now that we have talked about the disease, let's actually talk about the society, and this is of course mostly pertinent to natural true wererats, those that were born as such. How do they live their lives? What do they do all day? See, most societies of wererats have adopted to living in subterranean environments directly underneath humanoid settlements, most of which tend to be the sewers. There is something psychologically attractive about the long, stretching tunnels and the labyrinthine designs of sewers that make them feel safe in there. That, coupled with living on a particularly cramped warren, makes them feel safe. This ecological desire is shared with normal rats, and so you tend to see both living harmoniously together. In fact, normal rats tend to see wererats as alphas of their kind, and so they follow them wherever they go, which is why it appears as if wererats can just summon rats whenever they wish. These rats follow the wererat through scent, which they have learned to recognize in spite of the shape the wererat takes. Further, a wererat can actually communicate with the rats using a form of chattering language, a similar language that wererats use to communicate with one another. The difference is that when a wererat talks with normal rats, the chittering sounds are audible to humanoids. When 2 wererats are talking to each other, they use high-frequency squeaks, which are actually inaudible to most humanoids. 2 wererats stalking a prey could be having full conversations with each other, and the prey would be none the wiser. Also, fun fact, a collection of rats is called a mischief. That is awesome. Anyways, wererats are also psychologically inclined to always be with their kind. You will rarely ever see a wererat alone. However, the relationships they form together are very interesting. They never form interpersonal bonds like love or marriage, and like we described before, they don't really ever reproduce with one another. In spite of all of these things, they are extremely social with each other, the lore even describing them as gregarious creatures. But the way they interact with each other is different than what we we're accustomed to. We might even consider it strange. The creatures are almost continuously in competition with each other, sometimes for mates, sometimes for standing within their community, or sometimes for wealth or other kinds of tangible benefits. What's interesting is that the competitions that they get into are not really friendly, at least they don't look like they are friendly. You will see Wererats trying to take others down with sly and conniving tactics, or being generally aggressive to one another in these competitions. To us, it would look really like they're all enemies who hated each other, trying to make each other feel bad, or trying to hurt each other. But to the Wererats themselves, the behavior is not ill at all, but in fact quite the opposite. They find joy and community in these challenges and in these hard forms of banter. To them, it's all a good time. Now, when it comes to fighting, Wererats actually don't do much of it. They spend most of their time being as sneaky as possible, robbing, kidnapping, and eating people up in the city. And if the humanoids ever form a resistance, the Wererats typically just retreat to safety. This applies individually, but also collectively. If a true resistance is ever built to deal with the Wererats in the sewers, they are not at all hesitant to just literally abandon their lair and retreat. Since everything they own is stolen as it is, they have no qualms of just finding a new lair and stealing new stuff again. This makes them very hard to exterminate, and I mean very hard. They will always retreat against any kind of true force, and their retreats are very difficult to stop since they can turn into giant rats to run away. Plus, remember that their vulnerabilities are difficult to predict, so you never know what can actually hurt them. Plus, the monster manual didn't tell you this, but Wererats can actually regenerate lost limbs, and those Wererats who you might think you killed might not actually be truly dead. See, Wererats have the special ability to pretend to be dead. Basically, they can use the spell Feign Death, but as a natural ability of theirs, where they can slow down their metabolism so hard that they can make you believe that you have actually killed them, only for them to stand up minutes later and make a daring escape. Quote, Wererats are parasites. They recognize that they are physically weaker than most species that dominate the surface. They have found and exploited the one niche where they have a chance to dominate: the world beneath the cities. They feed on humans and steal their riches. Humans unknowingly protect the Wererats from both surface-dwelling creatures and those who might burrow up from far below. Besides, the humans pay for the upkeep of the Wererat sewer realm. End quote. They don't want to kill the humans, at least not fully, so they won't fight them, is basically the gist of it. But that being said, even though Wererats have no qualms of leaving their belongings in the case of a raid, they do typically have tons and tons of loot. Wererats are considered hoarders when it comes to loot. Whatever they can find that might be valuable, they gather and collect. Most of their treasure will be considered worthless by adventurers though, but there's always a good chance of finding extremely rare valuable things in there. Most will be junk though. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I would like to personally thank my Patreon supporters: Zach Bowell, Barry Maskant, 5E Magic Shop, Morgan Johnson, Rusty Rain, Biotechnofrag, Daniel Luna, Doug Feeder, Brad Salazar, Terry Culp, The Great Codini, Walker Motley, Omega Scales, Karathas The Bulwark, Ziran King, Ozol, Alex Cookson, Griffin Pierce, Falky951, Benjamin Bosters, Mr. Salty, Thomas Hunt, Drayden, The Role-Playing Junkies Podcast, Prince Daylight Morning Crown, Sabine Kurshab, Solarensis, Ordoric, William Slatt, Nathan McCum, Silent Shoppa, Bushido Burrito, AG Dare, Soulless Rider, Stalia, Items to Astound on DM's Guild, Samuel King, Lost Crusader, Jacob Ortiz, Tython, Sean Duthat, Trev909, Garrick Minnick, and JD Green for supporting me on Patreon at the $25 level. If you would like to support me as well, then please head on over to patreon.com/MrRex to support. Alright guys, that's it for the video. I do want to tell you guys that I am planning something big for Baldur's Gate 3, the video game. I'll basically be running through the game using my lore play format that, for those of you who do not know, I did this run of Skyrim where instead of just kind of focusing a lot on the game, at least on the gameplay side of it, I was basically just focusing on the lore, right? If I would enter into a dungeon, I would talk about the lore of that dungeon, I would talk about the lore of the characters, of the cities, anything that I would come across, I would basically talk about what it means within the context of the world, explaining the books, explaining the story, all that good stuff, and well, you guys really like those videos, so I was thinking I would bring those over to Baldur's Gate and just talk about the lore, which I'm assuming is going to be a lot of Mind Flayer lore, a lot of Astral Plane lore, and, well, Baldur's Gate, the actual city. So if you guys are interested in that, then just keep an eye out. I'll do a Patreon. Those are going to be Patreon-only things, so I'll end up doing, I think it's a $1 Patreon thing that I'll be uploading over there, and maybe even over here for those of you who support me on Patreon. So look forward to that for those of you who support me on Patreon. Just a little thing for you guys to give back to you for supporting me so much. I love you guys. You guys are the best. Also, guys, of course, remember to support the Kickstarter for Grim Hollow, the Player's Guide. I'm not kidding. The first book they released was amazing. Like, it actually changed the way that I run certain scenarios, certain conditions, transformations. They have a lot of subclasses in there. I mean, the first book was great. This one is bound to be great as well. So please just go ahead and check it out. Just click the link in the description or in the comment section. Just look it up. Make your own mind, but I would please go in there and check out the video. They have like a nice little cinematic, which kind of gives you the feel of the book, so I would recommend going and doing that. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.